Hazel knew there was nothing she could do. Sat in the dark, in pain, hoping she would survive long enough for someone to find her. Morning became afternoon, and in the early evening, Hazel at last had some luck.
Hazel's friend George visited every Thursday.
Hazel? Hazel, are you in there?
Unfortunately, this attack had taken place in the early hours of Thursday morning, so George came the following evening. When he discovered that Hazel wasn't answering the door and the milk had been left on the doorstep from the morning, he called the police.
As far as Hazel knew, the first sign of her rescuers were when she had the sound of broken glass.
Help!
Hazel? Hazel?
Please, somebody!
Hazel was rescued. Her ordeal has lasted 15 hours.
And the next thing she described was the door to the cupboard being flung open and these arms reaching out to her to help her escape. Of course, to add to the dreadful fear and trauma that she suffered, she also had the indignation of being found by police officers covered in her own excrement and urine, for being locked in the cupboard for, it was approaching some 15 hours. It was 7 o'clock that night before she was released.
Hazel was in hospital for 3 weeks. Dehydrated and in shock, she also suffered extensive bruising, a broken rib, as well as injuries caused by a violent rape. So, a major police investigation was launched to try and find Hazel's attacker. Progress was slow, in part because in the immediate aftermath of that violent assault, Hazel had told the police her attacker could have been white.
There was no scientific evidence from the scene, such as fingerprints, clothes fibres, or anything of that nature. Inquiries were made of closed-circuit television and such like, but the only evidence that came to light was in fact from semen found upon Hazel herself.
Baker hadn't used a condom. Immediately after her rescue, swabs were taken from Hazel's body in the hope a DNA profile could be made from any semen present. And within weeks, a full DNA profile of the attacker was created. It was sent to the recently established National DNA Database.
In 1997, the National DNA Database had been running for 2 years and was proving to be an extremely useful intelligence tool. You now could have a DNA profile from an unsolved crime, which could be compared to anything on that DNA database. So it was like you could pluck a name out for the investigating officer.
But it didn't work in Hazel's case. The DNA profile taken from the attacker remained unidentified. By the start of 1998, the investigation into the attack and rape of Hazel Backwell was really struggling. The police still had nothing to go on apart from that unidentified DNA sample. And then, at the start of January, just short of a year since the original attack, a breakthrough. The police in Hackney arrested a man for burglary, and that arrest would restart the investigation into who attacked Hazel. The man suspected of burglary was taken to Hackney Police Station for questioning. It was 41-year-old Wendell Wilberforce Baker, although he gave police a false name. He called himself Orton Brown. The police failure to spot that Baker was lying about his name would have enormous consequences as this investigation unfolded. Now, as part of standard practice since the mid-90s, a saliva sample was taken from him for DNA profiling on the database.
It was becoming apparent what a fantastic intelligence tool it was for solving crime. So the number of crime stain profiles that were loaded on there was increased from, rather than just being murders and serious rapes and assaults, it was widened to all sorts of crime, including burglaries and car thefts.
8 months later, Wendell Baker was found not guilty of the burglary. But 6 weeks after that acquittal, a key moment in the investigation. Officers investigating the attack on Hazel Backwell were given new information. A match had been made between rape swabs taken after the attack on Hazel and Baker's DNA profile given during the burglary investigation. The match between the two full DNA profiles meant there was just a 1 in 17 million chance that it was someone other than Baker. The police were convinced they had their man.
DNA identification is improving all the time, but in 1997 it was still highly accurate and very discriminating.
Good evening, Mr. Baker.
With that DNA match, Wendell Baker was arrested a week later on suspicion of rape and taken to Forest Gate Police Station.
I must warn you, you're still under caution.
Now, to start with, Baker wasn't told of the DNA match. Detectives questioned him about the attack on Hazel. Baker denied any involvement and he refused to cooperate with the police.
Do you know Hazel Backwell?
No comment.
Have you ever been in Litchfield Avenue?
I ain't got nothing to say.
He exercised his right to make no comment during the course of the questioning.
No comment, no comment, no comment.
And he made it quite clear that he was not willing to provide a DNA sample.
Do you consent to this?
No.
So you're refusing?
And so the police then took a non-intimate sample.
You like a cup of tea, Mr. Baker?
No thanks, mate.
Police need a second sample to check the results of the first match.
What the hell are you doing, mate? We've done that for.
If a suspect refuses to give a blood or saliva sample, officers are allowed to take a hair sample without consent.
I'm going to see somebody about this.
The police sergeant, in fact, pulled some of his hair out, and he was a man with dreadlocks, and it resulted in a dreadlock being removed from his head.
And the reason that they need to be pulled hair roots is that we need a good amount of nuclear DNA, which is only present in the roots, not the shaft of the hair. And they need to be pulled, and you need probably a minimum of 12 hairs to get sufficient DNA for a full DNA profile.
The results were back within 3 days. They confirmed the second DNA sample taken from Baker's hair also matched the rape scene DNA. And it came with the same probability, a 1 in 17 million chance that it was someone other than Baker. After 89 hours in custody, Baker was presented with the DNA evidence against him. He continued to deny any involvement in the rape, but the police were now convinced. He was charged with the attack on Hazel Backwell and the burglary of her property.